What's your weakness? I suspect you know it. In fact, I bet that the question alone springs bad thoughts to mind. Perhaps it's a vice. Drugs, drinking, gambling, sex. Maybe it's a physical or mental disability. It could be something so simple as self-doubt. I don't know. But I bet you do. Because ultimately, we all have one. Superman had his kryptonite, Achilles had his heel, and here in Laos, Shaanxi had an anus. This is one of the holiest places in all of Laos. It's called That Luang, and it pays homage to a legendary Lao hero called Shaanxi. And when I say legendary, I don't mean a real person whose story has been distorted over time, but a genuine legend. His story almost certainly didn't exist outside of mythology. The temple was built in the 15th century, but they claim that the land it was built on was holy for thousands of years before that. There's no real way to prove it true or not. The tourism board says that it was originally built in 500 BC to host the bones of Buddha and relics from Shaanxi, but that's almost certainly not true. Considering that Shaanxi probably didn't exist and Buddha's bones would likely not have been sent from India to a small village in Laos, it seems more likely that the temple was more of a way of a 15th century king to gain respect from his southern subjects. Further to that, it seems unlikely that a Lao hero would have come from an area that Lao people didn't yet live in. But I digress. Yet, real or not, Shaanxi's legend is incredibly important to Laos, and I've got to say, the myth is pretty funny. Not only that, but it's virtually impossible to Google online. There's almost nothing about this on the internet, at least in English. So in the spirit of spreading cultural awareness, let's look at the first Chao Sakat, Shaanxi. In a time before history, there was a king who ruled over the ancient region of Vientiane, now the capital of Laos. His daughter was a known beauty, and she courted many suitors, all of whom were rejected. She was worth far more than they could offer, not because of her beauty, of course, but the kingdom that she would inevitably inherit. But the kingdom was in turmoil. The region surrounding Vientiane had been harassed by an army that no one could control. Not an army of men, but an army of elephants. Exactly how this army of elephants was harassing people isn't exactly clear. I like to imagine they were sneaking up to windows and trumpeting real loudly in the middle of the night. But I presume by out of control, they mean the elephants were going around stomping on people. But of course, that's not ideal. Kingdoms work better when your citizens aren't flat and squishy. So the king sent out his finest warriors to stop the elephants, but they were stomped in turn. With the situation dire, he issued a decree. Any man who could stop the stomping would be given half the kingdom. And what's more, they'd get to marry the princess to boot. It would be like the ancient Lao version of winning the Powerball or becoming Kate Middleton or something like that. So in stepped Shaanxi. Unbeknownst to the king and country, Shang had a secret. He'd stirred some of his rice with a dirty stick, and as we all know, dirty sticks are magical. The rice turned black, which was considered a terrible omen in Lao society, and rather than face public shame, Shang quickly ate the whole thing. But he wasn't harmed. In fact, he was rewarded. Like Achilles being dipped in the water, Shaanxi found that the rice had changed him. He was now stronger than 100 men and completely impervious to harm. Except for his anus. The anus was very much in play. Don't really describe how they figured that out, though. I'm guessing hemorrhoids? Maybe one of those banana seat bicycles. So Shaanxi takes his newfound invulnerability and sets out to hunting those rampaging elephants. He uproots a tree, uses it as a club, and starts smacking elephants left and right. And since elephants are blissfully unaware of human rectal physiology, they couldn't quite figure out his weakness. After a 3-day fight with the Elephant King, Shang was victorious. With success buoying his spirits, he headed to the capital and claimed his prize. But the king wasn't too keen on having to give away half his kingdom, and the princess was apparently not all that into her champion either. Why they'd offered a prize they were unwilling to give, I'm not certain. But you know how it is post-elephant slaughter. It's a really remorseful time. So the king and princess began hatching a plan to get back what they'd lost and get rid of Shang. The princess took her husband to bed, a classic honeypot. She asked him about the rice, the stick, and most importantly, his weaknesses. And just like every postcoital man I've ever known, he folded like a house of cards. The beans were spilled. His ass was grass. The princess told her father, and he hired an assassin. Climbing down into the pit latrine behind Shaanxi's house, the assassin presumably waited in a pile of poo until the lights went out. There's another telling of this story where the king builds a mechanical toilet lance and forces Shaanxi to sit down on the seat, but I personally prefer the idea of a poo assassin. How the assassin knew the butt of his victim, not entirely explained in the story, but if that's where you stop suspending disbelief, I'm not sure you were listening to the first half. With an assassin's arrow/mechanical toilet lance piercing his anus, Shaanxi died on the toilet, like Elvis. The king took his land back, his daughter presumably married a man slightly less magical, and everything just sort of went back to normal. But Shaanxi's newfound subjects lamented his death, and in their sadness built a temple to express their grief. And as the story goes, that temple would have been built on the grounds where Thakhek now stands. Now, I have no idea what this story is supposed to symbolize, except for perhaps the fact that folk legends are hilarious. But even if I were Lao, I suspect that the hundreds, if not thousands of years of retelling would have changed the exact meaning to the point that it's pretty impossible to determine. But I can guess, or depending on how you look at it, make up a moral all my own. To me, this is a story of hubris. Hubris of the king and hubris of the hero. This is not a story with a happy ending. Sure, man was able to conquer nature. The elephants that were threatening the kingdom were destroyed by humanity's best. But that hero was in turn defeated by humanity's worst. Humans are our own worst enemy, and nobody, no matter how powerful, is invulnerable. Ultimately, we all have an anus. This is Rare Earth.
This is Rare Earth. Bye bye.